for a conference entitled Critical Approaches to Armenian Identity. We've spent quite a bit of time trying to organize the conference. I hope you enjoyed the first day and this morning's panels. The panel at the moment is entitled Armenians in Turkey, and unfortunately one of our speakers will not be with us today. I would like to apologize on his behalf. Mahir Özkan cannot join us because of very serious personal reasons. So we'll start with our first speaker, Mehtap Tosun. Mehtap Tosun received her master's degree from VIII Sociology with a thesis entitled Flexible Labor Policy and the Crisis of Trade Unionism, the Case of Tekel Workers' Resistance in Ankara. And she finished the thesis in 2011. Mehtap Hanım has been studying in VIII Sociology, trying to do her PhD. And even during her PhD years, she's already finished quite a few articles and presentations in national and international journals and conferences. And at the moment, she's working as a research assistant in the VIII Sociology department. Her paper today is entitled Reconstructing the Self and Reclaiming Identity via Collective Memory, Dersim Armenians. I'd like to remind all our panelists that we have a maximum of 15 minutes, and I'll be giving you sort of reminders. So I give the word to Mehtap.
Merhabalar.
Hello. As Hülya said, I will be talking about reclaiming oneself through collective memory, and I will explain my case with the example of Dersim Armenians. Actually, this research I will present you has been continuing since 2010, but it has not yet been published. But there are some articles about this issue which have been published about the Armenians in Dersim. And this presentation consists of interviews I conducted in Dersim and in Istanbul since 2011. I talked to Armenians living in Dersim, in Istanbul, and also talked to Armenians who came to Turkey from abroad and who stayed there for a certain period of time. I have had 45 interviews, and I'm still going on with my interviews. And as soon as I complete all my interviews, I will get this published. No. In 1915, there are some Armenians who took shelter in Dersim, or who were saved and who survived in 1915, and how they got integrated to the daily life after that. So I listened to some stories. Actually, there were also some searches for getting rid of Armenian identity after the problem. So because of the problems with the central authority, there are Zazas, Kurdish, and Alevites. So Armenians, some of the Armenians might have chosen one of these identities and might have got integrated to one of these local identities to survive. So I will explain how this happened. So this choosing one of these so-called safe identities doesn't automatically bring about getting rid of Armenian identities, because none of these identities is so safe in Turkey. So there are also local diversities in belonging. And I will also try to explain the reconstruction of identity of Dersim Armenians through collective memory. Actually, identity reconstruction has two parts. One is protection and salvation. And the second one is the identity experience both at home and in the street, on the basis of the stories transmitted from the family and transmitted from the people in the environment. Now let me talk about the travel with third persons in 1915. So stories of the deportation in 1915. Some local people protected some of these Armenians back then. So these stories prove that there were not only massacres and killers, but also protectors, local protectors. So among Dersim Armenian, there is that discourse about the protection provided to them. So the reference point is that protection mechanism, was this protection mechanism, conditioned on certain expectations or not, in return for a favor from the other side. So those people who protected Armenians are some certain tribes in Dersim and certain personalities who protected Armenians. Excuse me, I'm speaking too fast.
Dersim'in bölgede bir son olarak ortaya çıkan
Well, the fact that the Dersim emerged as a problem and then the Armenian problem became a national and international problem happened actually in the second half of the 19th century. Armenians in 1895, 96 and 1915 went through all the stages of genocide. So concerning the process of massacres that took place, it is said that some of the tribes in Dersim tried to protect Armenians in certain locations by taking up arms, but in some other locations, some of the other tribes joined the massacres and tried to actually possess the belongings and property of the Armenians, but it is said that most of the tribes there in Dersim tried to protect Armenians. So these tribes, which had some problems with the central authority, had not even joined the Hamidian unit, so it proves a positive relation with Armenians. So in Dersim there is not, that clear duality of perpetrators and victims. So there are third parties there. That's what I mean. Those third parties which did not join the massacres, but which wanted to protect Armenians in return of certain favors. So these known or unknown protectors paid attention to the suffering of the Armenians and protected them, some of them. So I talked to a female interviewee of 91 years old. She explained by whom they were protected and how they were protected. So the Kurdish people protected us and put us in their homes for 40 days, gave us food, and they took us to a mansion there. Then a soldier came up and they asked to the Kurdish guy, it is said that you have brought some Armenians and you have concentrated them in a place. And the Kurdish guy said, we don't know any Armenians, we haven't seen any Armenians, Camera saved us. And he said, there is no Armenian in my tribe, all these are parts and villagers and members of our tribe, he said. Another interview we said, as far as I remember, well, we have been protected by Yusuf Hanlı tribe. It seems that they have mercy, sense of mercy. And my grandmother was protected by that tribe. So these histories explain the conduct of the people who protected Armenians. So this information provided by the interviewers also explain how they position these mechanisms of protection. So there was a transmission of that information of protection from generation to generation.
Olup biteni gözleyemeyerek açık ya da gizli kapak.
It seems that there was a clear or covert solidarity with the Armenians. However, although there was a positive reflect in terms of friendship after these protection mechanisms, some of the interviewers said that they were also expected to provide certain favors. So one of the interviewers said that this mechanism of protection was conditional on the transfer of their properties to the people who protected them. There is Musa, my grandfather was protected by them, and he asked Armenians to work for them just for food. So in 1929, my grandmother and my elder brother actually purchased and bought back their home later on. Another said, show us the Armenians, we will give you money. Some of them showed where Armenians were hidden, some didn't. But they worked secretly in some of the local houses, so like slaves. In these both interviews, okay, they acknowledged that they were protected, but in return of a certain favor. Well, this is different from the previous two testimonies, which said it was unconditional. So in these stories of protection, it's not only about Armenians in Dersim, but also Armenians in neighboring areas took shelter in Dersim after 1915, mostly from Harput, but Armenians coming from Harput actually took shelter in Dersim in return of certain favors. As far as I read from the books written by missionaries, tribes in Dersim asked for a certain favor to protect them, and they were really paid a certain amount to protect them. But the consulates and missionaries note that these people who would be taken to to Dersim would continue to live there, to find a job. That's why they have provided money and sent. So consulates and missionaries sent these Armenians to Dersim. And those who couldn't take shelter in Dersim went to Russia, and then after Russia to other places by intermediation of the consulate and missionaries.
Bu şeylerden anladığımız tehcir
So the stories, experiences of protecting individual Armenians, this is known all over Turkey, but in some places it is at the level of scale of the tribes, a certain community leader who protected Armenians at a collectively. But this collective protection mostly happened in Dersim, whereas in the other places it was mostly individual.
Şimdi ilk aşamada bölgedeki koruma ve kurtarma.
Now what about identity positioning in the stories of protection? But we can evaluate the loss of identity both at the level of home and street. So this metaphor of home refers to the places and homes where Armenians got hidden. And so Armenians were also aware of their Armenian identity, and at one point they wanted to discover it again. So we will now see how they discovered Armenianness within the atmosphere of home.
Şimdi bir örnek verirsek kimin içeriden keşfi için
Concerning the discovery of the identity from inside, well, men used to gather. There is a place called Hızır. There was also a cave, and we used to put down certain mattresses, and we used to pray all the night and make a fire. Then they used to wake us up very early. There was a small crook river, and my grandfather asked us to get into the water. I was 8-year-old. It was very cold. There was some hole on the other hill, and he asked us to go around to that point. You know, they said actually I was baptized, but I wasn't aware, so it was how baptism was done back then. So the oldest member of the family, actually, you saw how he sustained the baptism of his grandchildren by asking them to getting into the river. But the children didn't understand then. This ethnic and religious identity excluded in the country were transmitted with hidden emotions, and that person I talked to discovered his identity with a whisper. In another interview, I found that the first discovery of the identity happened through some images and symbols. That's how that identity was transmitted to the present time. That says, we had to move with our grandmother, and I saw some signs of crosses among our belongings. I asked my mother said me, you wouldn't understand this. After I grew up, one of our relatives had died. So after that point, actually, although I had asked my mother and she didn't tell me, I was 14, 15 years old. That's when she tried to understand. She said, "We are partly Armenian, your father is Kurdish, I'm Armenian," she said. In this experience, you see how the experiences are recorded in memory and how it contributes to the formation of the identity. So it seems that the identity is an issue of consciousness, both at individual and social problem. So things that are created unconsciously as well in the mind of the person. This unconsciousness in respect of the identity is also a sign that certain truths are hidden from that person. So a 65-year-old interviewer said that after a visit in the village, after a talk with the grandfather, he discovered that he didn't really belong to that tribe and he has an unknown secret. There was that mention of the community tribe leader. We went there and my grandfather asked us where we were going, and then someone asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "To visit grandfather." And he said, "It's not your grandfather, your real grandfather. Your real grandfather's home is another place. You should go there and light a candle." So you see members of a generation who witnessed 1915, how these memories were locked up and emerged at certain points in time. So last 2 minutes, that's why I need to speed up. And how identity is discovered outside, I mean in the street. In the previous one, we saw what kinds of obstacles were present in terms of transmission of identity because of the oppression. But then there are some pieces which are fragmented in the memory. These are coming together later on, help the person to discover the identity. Another factor helping the person to discover the identity is street. What we mean by the street is the social surrounding and also the discourse in the street. So at unexpected moments, the discourse in the street triggers the remembrance, recollection of certain events. So a female interviewee in Dersim said that some stories, her Armenianness, which had never been explained to her by her family, was discovered in the street. She said, my actually maternal aunt was Armenian. I heard it from our neighbors, not from my family. So although the Armenian people in Dersim and the other people had friendship, relationships of friendship, the hate towards Armenians was also visible in daily life. So this is the most sorrowful and most difficult aspect which triggered the discovery of the identity. So the Armenian identity, which was despised, was also discovered in this atmosphere. Whenever I went out, people used to call me, oh, she's an Armenian. My parents didn't tell it to me. We were always insulted. So what was it, being an Armenian? We even heard the older people calling other people Armenian to insult them.
Şimdi hızlı atlıyorum. Soru kısmını da biraz da açarım.
I might elaborate on some of this during question answers part. In these testimonies, we had talked about Islamized Armenians and in which community they are assimilated. Those in Dersim chose to be assimilated to Alevi, Alevite identity. So we understand this clearly from these testimonies. So Alevites were friendly towards Armenians. So I'm both happy with my being Armenian and Alevite at the same time. So the Armenian identity is based on a perception, concrete perception of the Sunni and Alevite identity, which also explains how Armenian identity was accepted by one of these. To conclude, we might say that being an Armenian in Dersim, today's Dersim, today, doesn't mean something more than expression of the recollection of that identity. But recently I've heard some news, some Armenians in Dersim who were baptized. That was reported by the media press. Now it seems that some of these are being baptized and changing their names in the course of the last couple of months, so they are making a particular effort to rediscover their identity, it seems.